Hey, welcome back, Better Call Saul friends. I want to take some time to talk about Jeff and Marion and how they could integrate into the rest of Better Call Saul. Before we get into it, spoilers all the way up till Better Call Saul Season 6, Episode 10, titled Nippy, as well as all of Breaking Bad, especially Season 5 of Breaking Bad. For the dozens of you out there who have been watching Better Call Saul but have not seen Breaking Bad yet. I'd actually love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on the show if that's you. Really interesting. But I'm going to veer into somewhat controversial territory today, which is the ending of Breaking Bad. Now, the last season and the finale, Felina, has been received quite positively by both critics as well as fans. And that season did contain some great scenes as well as some great episodes, including one of the best episodes of TV ever, Ozymandias. To be clear, I think the ending of Breaking Bad was rather fitting. Hank finds out that Walter is Heisenberg and he loses his life in the process of trying to bring Walt to justice. As a result of his death, Walt's relationship and his family is irreparably ruined, where he has some of his money remaining but not much else in his life. And Walter is able to come to terms with his own actions, and he finally owns up to Skyler in the fact that he did it all for himself. He ultimately dies in the place that he loves, in that chemistry lab, surrounded by the product that really made him feel alive, yet he is separated and isolated from his family. I don't have any issues with that overall arc. What I do have a problem with, especially towards the end of Breaking Bad, is the Nazis. The Nazis were late additions to the story who, in my mind, had an outsized influence over the last few episodes of Breaking Bad and an outsized influence over how the show ended. So my question for you today is, are Jeff and Marion going to become the new Nazis? To be very clear, what I mean by that is, are Jeff and Marion going to have an outsized influence over how Better Call Saul is, just the way that I think the Nazis did towards the end of Breaking Bad? Now, if you need a little refresher of what happened towards the end of Breaking Bad, let's jump into that, and then we'll transition into talking about Jeff and Marion. So, at the end of Season 4 of Breaking Bad, we had the episode Face Off, and now's the episode where Walt gets the best of Gus by using Hector Salamanca to kill Gus in the nursing home. Walt, later in a phone call with Skyler, tells her that I won.
What happened?
I won.
Now that episode, in and of itself, could have been the series finale. In fact, Vince Gilligan said that he wrote that episode that way because they were not sure that they would be renewed for a season 5, and he would have been content had that been the series finale. I'm going to put his whole quote up on the screen right now. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but if you want to pause the video and read what he had to say, back over 10 years ago, feel free to do so. So, as we've learned through Better Call Saul as well as Breaking Bad, Gus was a mastermind in the criminal world and in the meth world. He was a thoughtful, intellectual, and worthy adversary for the high school chemistry teacher. Yet when they killed him off, and then they realized that they would get renewed for season 5, they realized they needed a new antagonist for Walt. And so someone had to fill that gap, because again, they felt like the Gus storyline was done, and it was time for Walt to kind of come into his own in the city of Albuquerque. So Walter won that one, but they still needed a new antagonist for Walt to face off against. Now, as season 5 of Breaking Bad opens, they show a Walter who is disheveled, he's in a diner, and he's buying a machine gun from a guy who he's bought guns from before. At this point in the show, we do not know what that machine gun is for. And what's even more interesting is that the writers did not even know how they would use that machine gun. We have said this before, the writers have talked about this a lot, that sometimes they write scenes without knowing how it's going to end up. And Vince Gilligan has talked about how hard it was to get out of this plot hole, especially relating to this machine gun. So, how did the writers figure out how to use this machine gun as well as find an antagonist for Walter White? They came up with a group of Nazis who, by luck, came to Walt's GPS coordinates even after Walter told them to not come, and they were able to take most of his money as well as kidnap Jesse to keep him cooking meth for them. Now, here's my issue with all of that. After seeing the mastermind that Gustavo Fring is throughout the entirety of Breaking Bad, to see someone as uninteresting as these Nazis become the chief antagonist was pretty disappointing. They just joined the show towards the end of the series without any backstory or references to them in prior seasons, and then they come to take a pretty major part in the remaining episodes of Breaking Bad. Were they as interesting as the cartel, or as Gus, or the cat and mouse game that was going on between Walter and Hank? Or were they as interesting as Jesse and Walt's on-again, off-again, tortured relationship? Not even close. Yet in the final episodes, they were a pretty decisive part in how this great show ended. Walt uses the machine gun that we saw earlier in the season. He miraculously parks a car where the Nazis told him not to park without any pushback from those dumb Nazis. And then he is able to rig it so that the gun goes off and kills everyone in the house with the exception of Walt and Jesse. Yes, that ending did fulfill its purpose of giving Walt one last antagonist, as well as wrapping up a loose end that they mistakenly gave themselves in the machine gun. But to me, it simply wasn't as satisfying as it could have been. I was more invested in many other parts of the story, so to see it end with the showdown between Walt and the Nazis was, frankly, a letdown. Now, what does that mean for Better Call Saul? I wouldn't say I'm worried, because in Gilligan and Gould I trust, but I am curious if Better Call Saul is headed for the same fate as Breaking Bad. Could we have a Better Call Saul ending with two relatively minor characters having an outsized role in the remaining episodes, despite them barely being featured in the previous 5 seasons? I am talking about none other than Jeff the cab driver and his mommy, Marion. We are introduced to Jeff in season 4, where he takes Gene home from the hospital, and then again in season 5, where he confronts Gene at the mall and asks him in a very menacing voice to admit that he's Saul Goodman and to say the famous line, "Better Call Saul."
Come on, man. Say it.
In the last episode that we saw, Season 6, Episode 10, Nippy, we come back to Jeff's storyline, and we figure out he's not as much of a menace as he is a bumbling loser. We also meet his mommy, Marion, who lives with her son, Jeff, or Jeffy. Now, their storyline could conceivably have been wrapped up in that last episode, but I'm not so sure that that's going to be the case. We have a few different lines, and shout out to all of my YouTube commenters who pointed this out and said, talk about this, Scott. And towards the end of that episode, we had a few lines that could be construed as meaning that we will get more of both of them. In that last scene with Marion and Gene, Marion says that her son, Jeffy, fell in a bad crowd in Albuquerque. She also, and we don't know what that bad crowd is, and we also do notice that Gene says he's never been to Albuquerque, which we know is a lie. So does she know that? What kind of bad crowd was Jeffy involved in? Does he know more about Saul than what's been led on from the scene in the mall? The next thing that she says is that, Gene, you're a really good influence on Jeff. Obviously, we know that's not the case. Is Marion saying that because she knows that that's not the case? Or is she still naive at this point? And then the last thing that we notice in this scene is that when Marion asks about Nippy, the dog, Gene has a momentary memory lapse, and he has to kind of snap himself out of it before he comes up with the story about Nippy being found from some neighbors who were taking care of Nippy, the fake dog. So I have heard also from some of you, my great YouTube friends, that they wouldn't bring in someone like Carol Burnett, who plays Marion, for a single episode. Now that really does make sense to me. So maybe she and Jeff will show up again. Now, I would personally be fine if those two characters, had their story arcs resolved in season 6, episode 10. But even if they aren't, even if they do reappear, what I really hope they do not do is give those two an outsized role in how this show is going to end. If they are merely minor characters that push Gene in the direction he's already heading, that's great. If as a result of Gene's interactions with Jeff and Marion, he realizes that he needs to do something, like reunite with Kim, or turn himself in, or commit another scheme, then I am all for it. I simply do not want to see Jeff and Marion have as big of an influence on the remaining episodes as the Nazis did in Breaking Bad, because that, in my mind, would distract from what we've been watching these last 5 seasons. We have not been watching to see Jeff and Marion. We have been watching to see Jimmy transform into Saul. We've been watching to see Mike and Gus transform into who they are in Breaking Bad. We've been watching to see what happens to Gene after the Breaking Bad timeline. And most importantly, in my mind, we've been watching to see Jimmy and Kim. Now, 2 of those story arcs I just mentioned, they are done, while 2 of those story arcs still remain. So I hope that that is where the main focus is going to be for the last 3 episodes. I would love to hear what you think in the comments below, and please do not forget to like and subscribe. I will see you next time. Bye.